Today I will be recapping the first 15 sessions of our Curse of Strahd adventure. The campaign started out with each of the characters receiving their own vision or dream sequence. We start off with Maurice, who found themselves stumbling out of the mouth of a cave that had just collapsed, their ally's body surrounding them completely. They looked down at their hands, which are now black and scaleless, as Maurice was no longer the male lizard folk that he once was, but now the female drow. Maurice remembers the hunger that crept in and the presence that reached out and plucked him from the nothingness that was death. His vision fades. Tarmac found himself dozing off after a long day's work and dreams of having his father's utility belt and running from a mob chasing him. As he makes his way towards a manor, he enters and sees a tall, sleek gentleman, but the moment the gentleman turns towards him, he lashes out and Tarmac's vision fades. Clypius returns to her old room after a long day of research and studying with the local scholars. She dozes off and remembers back to the day of the ritual. She remembers her master showing her where she should set up and all of the preparations that led up to it. And she also remembers everything going wrong. She remembers all of the other students falling to dust around her and the magical implosion throwing her against a wall. The vision then changes, where she sees a figure slumped over in a chamber with a book open on the dais in front of it. When she shifts over and tries to take a look at her figure, her vision fades as well. As Retta fell into a restless sleep, she was back enjoying a meal with her husband in the home that they once shared. The tranquil moment was shattered, though, as their animals shriek out in terror. Aretta's husband left to defend and protect the homestead, and after a few moments the door burst open and a grand wolf attacks Aretta, but Polis, her faithful companion, leaps in front of the attack. Aretta was then knocked into her table and her vision goes white. She awakens sometime later to something poking at her leg, and as she moves, the child runs off. Retta leaps up and exits her house, following the tracks into the forest, where she sees multiple forms of wolves running alongside her in the mists. The largest shadow of the wolf distorts and takes the form of a man, but before she can see any distinct characteristics, her vision too fades. Shortly after receiving a letter asking for his assistance, Cuvier falls into a deep slumber. He received a vision of a silver dragon flying over a verdant valley, which then flashes to a great hall being built with a banner of said silver dragon. His vision flashes once again back to the valley, but this time having been through a war, now with a grand fortress with a raven standard flying in the winds, the great hall of the silver dragon crumbling to ruin. Vision of the valley fades once more, and the world is filled with fire suddenly as the caravan around him burns. A toddler, Cuvier tries to escape the cart that he was in, but he is caught by a large man wielding a scimitar. Flash forward 15 years or so, Cuvier's got a sword in his hand in a fight to death against his own brother. He kicks him down and plunges the sword through his brother's chest, and as Guard let out his dying breath, Cuvier feels his connection to Zalakas, his guardian angel, sever as his vision fades as well. Everyone finds themselves looking at the visage of an elderly woman. Eyes milky, she seems to look directly at them. "Find the others," she says. "Seek them out, you will know them by their symbols. Find me then, and I will show you your destiny." Each of the characters then wakes up in their own points of their journey, finding a card either in their hand or in a pocket. On each of the cards is inscribed, "Come to the Gleaming Dolphin, a refuge for weary travelers," along with a map showing the route from where they are. As each of them flips the card over, they have symbols on the back. Aretta's is the beast, Cuvier's is the artifact, Clypius is the broken one, Tarmax is the trader as in a merchant, and Maurice's is the tempter. In their own ways, each of the characters follow the map and find themselves at the Gleaming Dolphins, which is conveniently located less than a day's journey for each of them. Aretta arrives first and meets the tavern keep with the ostentatious outfit, who's told her that someone had paid for 5 rooms for the holders of the cards. Clypius and Cuvier arrive shortly after and are soon followed by Maurice. Each of them stands in the tavern when Tarmac decides to make a spectacular entrance right after things have settled down. After that, each of the characters make small talk and learn that none of the other party members know anything about the job, the employer, or the cards that seem to have appeared out of nowhere. Each of us head off to our rooms that were provided to us after copious amounts of food and drink, and we fall into an uneasy sleep. In the middle of the night, each of them is awoken by a shift in our surroundings. We find ourselves outside in a foggy forest with none of our belongings. After everyone recovers from the initial shock of waking up in a completely different location, the mist starts to encroach on us, and noticing that touching it seems to sap us of our energy, we are forced to follow the path that the mist is directing us in. Eventually we are brought to a large gate, and once we are forced through by the mist, it slams shut behind us. After a valiant attempt to push the gate open failed, we continued down the road, as that was the only direction to go. After a while, we came to a house with 2 children crying in front of it. They introduced themselves as Rose and Thorn Durst, and asked us to find their brother and slay the monster in their basement. We agreed to help the kids and slowly make our way through the house, uncovering evidence of cultish and supernatural activity as we go. Unable to immediately find a way into the basement, we made our way upstairs and found hidden rooms filled with books and letters written by various people, indicating that the parents, Elizabeth and Gustav Durst, had tried to perform some cultish ritual involving their youngest son, Walter, as a sacrifice. We come across a stranded puppy with a collar that names him Lancelot, who seems to have wandered into the house and gotten trapped. We fought the ghost of Nanny Margaret, who had turned into a banshee, and made our way up to the 3rd floor, where we found the body of Gustav Durst hanging in his room after he had taken his own life out of the guilt of what he had done to his youngest son. We make our way into the attic, where we found the remains of Rose and Thorn, the 2 ghost children who had beckoned us into this house to begin with. After taking a rest before continuing down the hidden stairway leading from the attic to the basement. In the basement, we find the Durst family crypt, some bunkers where some cultists would hang out, and a bunch of monsters, including some shadows that ended up taking the life of Cuvier, and some ghouls that killed Aretta. Both of the 2 that were killed in the basement were met by a different entity upon their deaths, and was offered a new chance at life in return for ending Strahd's reign over Barovia. Each of them, desperate for life, accepted. We continue through the basement and find a room with a shadow gas that used to be Elizabeth Durst. We killed her and placed her remains, along with those of Gustav, Rose, and Thorns, all in the family crypt to finally lay their spirits to rest. We continued forward in the dungeon, where we were led to a deeper chamber where we found some strange artifacts sitting on pedestals around the room. Cuvier took a baby dragon skeleton, Clypius took an angel feather, and Maurice took a piece of amber that emanated an evil aura. We all continued to the next chamber where we got trapped and had to fight horrible monstrosity whose heart was the body of the baby Walter Durst. After Maurice was able to eviscerate the creature from the inside, we took Walter's remains along with Nanny Margaret's, who was actually Walter's true mom, as we had discovered in some letters written earlier, and buried their remains at the threshold of the house, and we removed the curse of the Durst Manor. As we were finishing with the ritual and taking a rest, a black carriage rolls up to the front of the house, and a thin, dark-haired woman steps out. She introduces herself as Anastasia and offers us cheese and wine and a few health potions to recovering from our harrowing time in the haunted house. She's a bitch. She leaves us to our recovering after making it clear that she knows about each of us and climbs back into the carriage, the other door opening up as she does so, and a body was dumped out. As the carriage drove away, we go over and examine the body that was dumped out of it. We find a letter that was very similar to the one that Cuvier had received, urging him for his assistance. But instead of asking for her help, it was a plea to be left alone, to shut the gates of the valley so no more would be trapped in their peril. We finished our rest outside the ruins of the Durst house and continue our way deeper into the valley. After walking down the main road, we came across another village, where we first met Granny Morgantha, an old lady selling pies in the streets. She gives us direction to the Blood of the Vine Tavern, whose owners she doesn't get along with, and she also gives us direction to the burgomaster's house. As we were meeting with her, she did try to guilt-trip us into giving her the deed to the windmill, which we had found in Durst Manor. As we finish our conversation, she mentions that she lives in a windmill with her 2 daughters, between this town and the town of Vallaki. When we mention we found a deed to a windmill in the Durst Manor, she tries to guilt-trip us to give it to her, which rubs Cuvier the wrong way, and so he stubbornly refused. We end up finishing the conversation and making our way to the Blood of the Vine Tavern, where we meet Ismark Kolyanovich, the new burgomaster of the village of Barovia. When he notices Cuvier's blindness and Areda's barky condition, he recommends trying to find the Igor, a man who works for Strahd but does his best to try to curry favor with the locals by performing medical miracles. He is described as a stitched-together man with a lisp and a dog named Patches. He also tells us of his superstition that the 3 ladies who run the Blood of the Vine Tavern are probably spies for Strahd since they are Vistani. He invites us back to his place, which we gladly accept. But as we are making our way to his place, we are interrupted by a crash and a lady and her family running out of their house. It is then that we are informed that a plague seems to be going around town, turning people into zombies. We then continue on our way and finally arrive at the burgomaster's manor and discuss our adventures in Barovia so far. It is there that we also meet Irina, Ismark's sister, that Strahd has expressed an interest in. It says the only place that may be stray from Strahd in Barovia may be Vallaki, and that the burgomaster Vargas owed Kolyan, their father, a favor. He asked us to consider bringing her to Vallaki in an attempt to save her from Strahd. He also asked if we would be willing to help transport his father's body to the church for their funeral. We decide that in the morning we'll transport Kolyan's body to the Church of the Morning Lord, pack up stuff, and prepare to bring Irina to Vallaki. The next morning, over breakfast, Irina asked Areta if she is one of the forest folk around Barovia. Areta tells Irina and the group a bit about herself, and that it was 3 women who brought her back to life, not the blind angel who brought Cuvier back to life. We continue through the morning and deliver the coffin with Kolyan's body to the Church of the Morning Lord. It is there that we meet Father Donovich, the priest of the church, And we also hear his son, Doru. It is then that we learn that approximately a year ago, a group of villagers, including Doru, set out in an angry mob to Castle Ravenloft. Fortunately, Doru was one of the only survivors, and he returned with a craving for blood. Towards the end of the funeral, the party noticed an elven man standing to the side, waiting for the funeral to end. Ismark lets us know that his name is Rahadin, and that he is a member of Strahd's entourage. Being the bold party that we are, we walk up to him and start a conversation. He lets us know that he has a letter for Irina, and after a short conversation, during which Clypeus does ask about the deed to the windmill to be brought up with his master, Rahadin leaves and we finish the funeral. We decide to return to the burgomaster's manor, though we do decide to stop by Bildreth's Mercantile, where we meet Bildreth, who is indeed an asshole, who charges almost 10 times the price for any of his items that he has in the store, believing that if you need it bad enough, you'll pay the price. We also meet Periwimple, Bildreth's nephew, in the store, and Tarmac is chatting with him before Bildreth threatens to chase us off for not buying anything. On our way out, though, he does offer us a 40 mark credit on anything in the store if we take his quest to retrieve a package that he assumes was lost near the Ilvis River Bridge. After ignoring his request and framing Periwimple for knocking over some stuff on a shelf, Tarmac steals an explorer's kit and we all leave the store and head towards the well that we suspect is the source of the zombie plague. Clypeus detects disease rampant throughout the town's wells, but identifies the one closest to Bildreth's Mercantile as the one closest to the source of the infection. We then return to Ismark's manor, and a lady named Mary is knocking at the door, asking for Ismark to help her find Gertruda after she ran away from her home. Gertruda being the former owner of Lancelot according to Lancelot's dog tag. We let Ismark know that we were to clear the well of corpses, grab supplies, and set off in the morning to take Irina to Vallaki. We return to Bildreth once again with the goal of taming a net, this time bringing Maurice, who doesn't have as immediate of a visceral reaction as the rest of the party at Bildreth's presence. We ended up renting a net as we could not afford it with Bildreth's outrageous prices. We ended up renting the net and Periwimple to help pull the corpses from the well. Maurice traumatizes Periwimple by pretending to be Bildreth, saying he hates Periwimple, and after all the shenanigans of calming Periwimple down, we return to the well and continue our retrieval of the corpses. We clear them out with Aretta catching the last fragment of a limb that escaped the view of the other party members. We then return the net and make our way to the Blood of the Vine Tavern, where we meet Mirabelle, one of the co-owners, Eric, the bartender without a soul, and Radu, a local drunk who murmurs Mortu under his breath, a word that is clearly an insult to the fact that the three sisters have some sort of bad blood with the Vistani camp that they came from and are no longer welcome at. We are told that the Wizards of Wine, the local winery and vineyard, hasn't been sending many shipments out recently, and how they only have 2 varieties, the Red Dragon Crush and the Purple Grape Mash. We order some supplies from the tavern for the trip we're planning to take to Vallaki and return back to the Burgomaster's manor, where we meet up with Irina. We decide to pop open a couple of bottles of our wine and drink for the rest of the night and learn more about each other. We learn that Irina is an artist who draws and embroiders. Kuvir was kidnapped as a kid and trained as a soldier and ended up here. Tarmac's father taught him more of the technical aspects of his job. Clypeus was trained in both divine and arcane magics. And Aretta's dog won't leave her alone, even after death. As we continue our drinking games, Irina says that she draws her dreams to try to pass the time, and she also informed us that some travelers did pass through a while ago, one with a religious symbol resembling a big cross, and one with a wizard's book of sorts, though they only stopped for a day and haven't been seen since. We all talk about our past lives, Maurice literally, as they tell us that they died picking up a spear from a statue that caused a mine to collapse. And then we decide to play Halflings and Giants with secrets and or funny stories on the line. It is during these games that we learn that Clypeus is from Notera. The most impressive thing she's seen on her travels was the astral planes, and she traveled across the planes with her master Morland as a main point of focus in her training, and most of her peers, including her, had their memories wiped from before their training, and the name Clypeus was given to her since it means shield or protector, and that is the purpose that she was raised for. Tarmac implies that he didn't believe in ghosts before he arrived here, though he doesn't answer the question directly. His father was a talented artificer who used his abilities to fight crime to an obsessive extent. He acted as a vigilante figure in the city he lived in. Cuvier from Exandria was in prison for trespassing, destruction of property, tax evasion, destruction of crown property, assault, and assault with intent to kill a couple of times. Cuvier also follows Zalakas, who is not a god. Irina enjoys drawing landscapes, usually draws her dreams because that is what changes around her. Areta reveals that she was a shepherd of her tribe, so she didn't go and see many towns and villages as much, but she has seen some of the waterfalls, the red forest, the caves with glowing mushrooms, and the shifting mountain, which are all key landmarks in the land she comes from. After secrets were revealed and stories were told by an increasingly drunk party, we eventually all wandered off to bed. During the night, Clypeus looks over her scroll that she doesn't understand, and Maurice connects with the presence in the amp, who demands a sacrifice akin to that which the Durst offered. The presence referred to himself as the Finger of Oblivion, Norganus. Cuvier had a short follow-up dream to the one that he had the night before, and Areta dreams of the forest burning and the animals fleeing. And Clypeus dreams of a wizard's tower, filled with books written in an unfamiliar language that hurts her eyes to even look at. Tarmac dreams of Strahd. The next morning, we all gather around for another breakfast and discuss our options for the day. We decide that trying to track down Gertruda would be a fruitless endeavor since she has a full 2 days head start and we don't know which path she took to Ravenloft. We are also able to read the letter that Ismark received from Rahadin during the funeral, stating that Strahd sends his regards for the passing of Ismark's father. This should be a wake-up call that the world is a dangerous place and that Irina would be safer with him in Castle Ravenloft. Ismark says that there is no evidence of any foul play in the manner of Colian's death, but there is a story of Strahd having an interest in a girl from Perez, and the people decided to kill her rather than let her go, and the entire village was flooded and wiped off the map. After that wonderful revelation, we grab our things, say thank you to Ismark, and go to that tavern to pick up our things. We divvy up the rations between the party and make our way out of town on the old Svalich road with Irina. After about an hour of walking, we cross the first of the Ilvis River bridges and after a while we start to hear the sounds of a camp. We eventually come into sight of the Serapul Vistani camp, where we are greeted and treated like honored guests. We first meet Araha, the leader of the camp, and just after he offers us some food and drink, we are called by a voice from the central tent in the camp. Here we meet Madame Ava, the seer of the Vistani, who invites us into her tent and performs a reading for us. The reading is as follows. The first card, revealing the history and knowledge, was the Master of Stars. A great wizard dwelled in a tower above an ocean of sapphire, stained black by the night. Let his name and servant guide you to what you seek. The second card reveals a powerful force of good and protection, a symbol of light and hope, long since crushed from the land. The Avenger card, in the halls of silver held by hands once clean but now corrupted. You will find the light. The third card is of strength and power, an instrument of vengeance that will banish the night with a blade of pure radiance. The Elementalist card is turned. Your journey will be challenging. It hides in a small castle beneath a mountain guarded by amber giants. The Seer is the fourth card. They shall aid you in your battle against the darkness. An old soul with a mischievous heart plays amongst her peers, but the depths may spell her doom. She is to be sought where the Vistana are not welcome. And the final card, the Mist. Even now the mist obscures all. Madame Avos will call us once again when the time is right and reveal that which is hidden about ourselves and about our enemy. As she finishes her reading, Clypeus uses her magic to detect that the entire tent is brimming with divine magics, and once we all finish asking our questions, Madame Ava kicks us out of our tents and tells us to enjoy the night and relax at the camp. We enjoy some food and drinks and all go to the pool to clean off. We get some insight on Clypeus and Cuvier's scars, get Cuvier's eyes cleaned, and dye Irina's hair to help disguise her a bit more. Clypeus coincidentally happens to make 2 wisdom saves after talking about the big orb which she took from the Durst house. We return to the camp after cleaning ourselves off and find a full-on feast being cooked. We mingle with the Vistani, entertaining the kids that surround us with interest of the newcomers. We are introduced to Rena, who informs us that Strahd opens the mist to them when they tell him they wish to leave. He does so because when Strahd was hurt many years ago, a band of Vistani saved his life, and he has treated them fairly ever since. She also informs us that there are other places hedged in by the mist that are ruled by other powerful lords, but very little is known, as the last group of Vistani that visited those lands never came back. We introduce ourselves to the group, giving Irina a fake name to once again try to cover her identity. We finish our party conversation and split up to mingle amongst the camp. Cuvier makes his way over towards the lute player where he sits and enjoys the music. Clypeus sticks to her books and scrolls, and Tarmac meets Stefan Viles, one of the actors of the Vistani. As they're talking, Tarmac discovers that Stefan knows thieves' cant and sends him to Eliza, who has something she would want from Vallaki, though the Vistani are not allowed to enter. As Tarmac goes over to meet Eliza, Areta informs him that Stefan was watching Maurice intently because during this entire time, Maurice has been disguised as Irina, and that he should be watched. Tarmac then goes over to Eliza Agar to ask about the job she may have for him. She asks Tarmac to purchase a doll from Blinsky's, a toy maker in Vallaki. This doll would be for her niece Arabelle, who lives with Lugash and Argal in the Vistani camp near Vallaki. Arabelle's name day is coming soon, and Eliza wishes to give her the doll as a gift. Eliza offers that she will give Tarmac 10 marks now to purchase the doll, and 40 marks upon his return to the Sarapul camp. A magpie flutters down as they talk and lands on Eliza's shoulder, and she introduces him as Gurgesh, which means Darkwing. As Tarmac finishes his chat with Eliza, Areta goes up to the older lady reading a book, who introduces herself as Ursula. Areta asks if Ursula has any gauze to possibly help Cuvier pack his eyes with, as they are still weeping from when he was returned to life. After about 15 minutes of rummaging through her tent, Ursula brings the gauze over to Cuvier, where she helps dress his wounds, much to his discomfort. Ursula then returns to her tent to retrieve some more poultices, and Areta manages to convince Cuvier to wait for her to return. While they wait for Ursula to return, Araha offers Clypeus a drink, and when Clypeus asks if she can offer anything in return, Araha asks for stories to be shared later. He also mentions that they had a visitor a few years ago who was a powerful mage. This powerful mage made his way to Castle Ravenloft, and there was lightning seen emanating from there later on. He believes the mage's name was Mordenkainen, and then recommends Clypeus talk to Sophia when he saw her reading her books and scrolls before he moved on. Clypeus immediately went over to the angsty teen, who then asked her to read her poetry when Clypeus mentioned that she knew how to be published. Clypeus reviewed the work to find that Sophia seemed to romanticize Strahd, and Sophia tells the story of Strahd and Tatiana, and how Tatiana was killed on their wedding night by Strahd's own brother in a fit of jealousy. Clypeus copies a few of her stories and poems and promises to bring them to Vallaki to try to get printed. Back with Cuvier and Areta, Ursula returns and finishes packing his wounds and also brings a healer kit which she gives to Irina, thinking that she's Cuvier's sister, so she can pack his wounds in the coming days. As she finishes, Clypeus walks up and asks if there is any incense for magical purposes. Ursula offers a trade: incense and other more common spell components for romance books. As we conclude our conversation, Ursula gathers everyone around for the feast, and we tell various stories from our homelands. Once the stories are told, everyone splits off to their various tents, and the party decides to go swimming in the middle of the night to teach Cuvier how to float and show Irina how to shoot a crossbow. As we're relaxing at the pool in the middle of the night, Tarmac glances up and notices a parade of people off in the distance traveling up the old Svalich road. This is when Irina informs us of the March of the Dead. Most nights, the restless spirits of many of those who have passed within the valley of Barovia make their way down the old Svalich road, through the village of Barovia. She has never been this far out of the village, so she has no idea where they went, but seeing them, they continue on the Svalich road, past the Serpool camp. Areta also notices in the middle of the night a bird flying off from the Serpool camp in the direction of Castle Ravenloft. After relaxing for a bit longer, the party makes our way back to camp where we each fall asleep once more. The next morning, we gather our supplies once more and head back to the old Svalich road, making our way towards Vallaki. The events of the second day include a wolf attack by some very agile wolves. We also met Anastasia and Rahadin on the road. She ended up biting Clypeus, and Rahadin ends up fucking up the rest of the party. But it wasn't personal, so we have mad respect towards Rahadin now. On the road, we come across a traveler named Hyeli who joins up with us for a bit, and we make our way to the old windmill where we once more meet Granny Morgantha and her daughters. While we were at the windmill, we discover that the women are actually night hags who have been cooking children into their pies. We attack, but are barely able to harm them, and eventually we lose the fight when Cuvier, Areta, and Maurice all got captured by them and are forced to give a piece of themselves and are convinced to transport pies to the village of Vallaki. They are kept overnight and released the next day, where they regroup with Clypeus and Tarmac, Hyeli having left them the night before. Just before arriving in Vallaki, we go to the Vistani camp outside the city walls. This is where we meet Lugosh and Argal, the leaders of the Vallaki Vistani camp. After introducing ourselves and having a few conversations with the camp here, we make our way into Vallaki, where Clypeus, Tarmac, and Maurice deliver the pies, dirtying them up a little bit in the hopes of making them unappetizing for the general public. They also label them as a delivery from Bildrath's Mercantile in Barovia. After this, we go to the Blue Water Inn and meet the Mardikov family, the owners of the inn. We are tasked with getting some wine shipments coming from the vineyard again, as they too have not received any shipments from the vineyard in a few days. We also meet Father Lucian at the Church of St. Andrew, and he agrees that he'll help train Irina while we deal with the wine delivery, in the hopes of keeping her safe in the village walls rather than out in the wilds with us. After leaving the Church of St. Andrew, we meet Lady Voctor, who blames Baron Vargas's son Victor of hexing her daughter Stella with summon curse. We then go to Blinsky's toy store, where we meet Blinsky, the toy maker, and his pet monkey Binky. While we are there purchasing the doll for Arabelle for Tarmac's quest, we notice that he has some dolls that hold an uncanny resemblance to Irina, and being a bit suspicious of that, Maurice and Cuvier interrogated Blinsky on what he was doing with the dolls, but Blinsky was a bit cagey about his answers, to the point where it raised most of our suspicions. After being unable to get any information with Blinsky, we end up leaving, and on our way back through town, we meet Vargas, the Baron of Vallaki, who forces people to celebrate everything and have festivals every week in a misguided attempt to keep Strahd away from their city. After a short, curt introduction, we end up leaving Vallaki and making our way to the vineyard. On the way there, we meet Sir Godfrey Gwillem, Revenant Knight of Argynvost. He tells us that Argynvost was a silver dragon who had a great hall in the valley before he was killed by Strahd. The hall that he describes matches the description of the second card of our fortune telling. When we mention an interest in it, he tells us that it is overrun with corrupted knights of his old order, and that the only one who can still speak and maybe possibly reasoned with would be Vladimir. He tells us that the hall is on Kargas Pond along the Luna River, which flows south from Lake Zarovich, though he does warn us that we are far too weak to take it on right now. The group then continues on our journey towards the winery, though we are once again stopped on our way to the vineyard when we have to fight some zombies and druids. We were able to capture and interrogate one, and we let him go after he tells us that the druids he was working with were interested in the winery, and then he promises to stay out of trouble. We continue on, and once we're on the outskirts of the winery, we meet David Mardukov, patriarch of the Mardukov family. He informs us that druids have taken over the winery, and they have been thus far unable to take it back. He also mentions a tower on the road towards Kretz that matches the description of the tower in the first card of our tarot reading. We also meet Muriel, a blue and black-haired Mardukov. Mardukovs also inform us that they used to have 3 gems of power that help sustain the growth of the grapes, the last of which the druid have only just recently stolen. We infiltrate the winery and take on the druids who have taken over, eventually defeating them and kicking them out, once again restoring ownership to the Mardukov family. We continue through the winery and eventually explore a brown mold-infested basement and find silvered weapons and a raven totem in the chest. We ask the Mardukovs about the silvered weapons and the raven totem that they have in their basement, and they weren't very forthcoming with their information. They told us that they did not want to give us weapons that would boost our ego and end up getting ourselves killed. After this conversation, we gather a shipment of the wine, which is to be delivered back to the Blue Water Inn, and we head out on our way back to Vallaki. We are, however, stopped on our way back to Vallaki a couple times. The first time was when an asteroid came out of nowhere and a secondary Maurice came from the crater that landed right in front of us and basically told Maurice to give the amber to Hadar. Initially, Maurice was going to fight it, but after one round and near death, Maurice decided that it was probably best to give the piece of amber straight to Hadar and not deal with the Finger of Oblivion anymore. The second time that we were stopped was when we met Valenta, the mad scientist, psycho bitch, bride of Strahd, and we ended up having to fight her zombie abominations. We finished fighting her zombie abominations, though she was able to make an escape. We continued on our way back to Vallaki, and we delivered the wine to the Blue Water Inn. We returned to the church, and Cuvier was then promptly arrested for spreading unhappiness in the village of Vallaki, which has been deemed to be illegal by the Baron. Luckily, he and Maurice were able to put his belongings in a sack of onions so the guards didn't find his guard armor, which is very illegal to have if you're not a Vallaki guard. While Cuvier was imprisoned for the night, Tarmet went out and met with a man named Ernst, who frequents the Blue Water Inn and seemed to be very interested in the party. He then led us to meet with Lady Wachter, who informed us that the Baron is protecting his son and that multiple servants have gone missing from the Baron's place, and that if we were to start any investigation, we should start by checking the attic. She also informs us that Ezek is one of the only reasons that the Baron is still in power, Ezek being the Baron's right-hand man, whose one of his arms is very large and very red. When she says that she wants him dead, we do decide that if it can be helped, we will not kill Ezek. Though Clypeus does immediately go from that conversation to buying some poison, so we'll see. It is at this point when the interlude sessions will be taking place.